Hi guy, welcome to the AMIGArama podcast. I'm your host Lefarius, and in this week's show we are going to be taking a deep dive into supercars. But groaning aside, let's have a look at this week's Amiga news. First up is something that really caught my interest a couple of weeks ago now. Basically, someone called AmigaWave / Goblins are creating a game called EON, which is EON for the Amiga in AGA mode. Now, initially this is just a demo, but the thing that really caught my eye about it is just how close it looks to the original Shadow of the Beast, and it has that sort of background scaling and parallax scrolling, and the amount of detail they've done on the actual graphics and the look, and it looks incredible. And though it's only an initial demo, they are planning on doing a full game like that, and I'm really looking forward to this. I will stick a link to a video in the show notes. If you're an Amiga fan, you need to see this in action, because honestly I've not seen anything like this in a very long time, if at all. One thing I haven't mentioned in the last few weeks of the show is over Christmas there was a brand new Amiga game release called powerglove Reloaded. I actually covered this in a live stream, and it's sort of like a Mega Man type platformer where you get to run around in a Metroid-like world blowing stuff up, and I was absolutely taken aback by the graphics of this thing. It looked really fantastic. It's like something that you get on Steam in modern day era, you know. They really have gone to town on the graphics. There's also a mode in there, I think this is on the PC version, it might do it on the Amiga, I can't remember, where you can flick it over to like Commodore 64 graphics, and it really is interesting playing the two different versions. Again, you can go and look at the live stream tabs on the actual website to go and check that out, or you can just pop along to the link in the show notes to download your own copy. One thing you might have noticed if you're checking out the website recently is that I've just added a brand new tab all based around recapping Amigas. The chap behind it all is Steve from AmigaPassion.co.uk, and one thing people always seem to forget or don't have done is recaps inside the actual system. A lot of the time the Amiga is getting on to 30 years old now, and a lot can be like ticking time bombs, and he covers all Amigas. If there's any that you might not be sure about, just drop him a line via the website. The biggest plus is he actually does worldwide shipping from the UK, and this isn't any sort of like sponsorship, there's no sort of backdoor deals going on. The thing is, when I first started doing the show, Steve actually fixed my Amiga 1200. I was in a bit of a panic because nothing was working, and I needed it to like record gameplay footage and do reviews and things, and I sent it off to him and he did an absolutely amazing job. And I've been seeing over the last year he's developed this more and more. He's been doing lots and lots of these recapping jobs. I've heard nothing but good things about him, so I think he's highly recommended. Plus, it's never easy for people in this community to get stuff recapped because they can't always be sure that the person they're dealing with is actually going to be trustworthy. From everything I've seen and heard, I certainly think Amiga Passion is, and it's well worth a look if you want to get something recapped. As a kid growing up, I was really fond of racing games, in particular the top-down overhead ones. And for this week we are going to go with supercars, and I will admit that I have no experience with this whatsoever. I was hugely familiar though with the sequel, and I remember playing that one to death. It was one of my favourite car driving games on the Amiga at the time, and you're probably wondering, well, if you love that one so much, why are you tackling the first first. It's because I like to do things in order, which means we're going to do the first one today, and then sometime in the future we will return to the sequel. Supercars was originally published by Gremlin. Now they did loads of games, they're an absolute powerhouse back in the Amiga and the 8-bit days as well, I believe. Now they did games like Artura, Celica, GT Rally, Disposable Hero, which I've been told many times is an awesome shooter. I'm yet to take either a deep look at it or even play it, I'm afraid, but I will get to it at some point. Next up they did K240, I think I mentioned that before, it's like a strategy game. Little Devil. Now this is a game I was really eager to cover. I couldn't find any information about it, then thanks to Everything Amiga, or the Amigos podcast, I got pushed in the right direction for some information and managed to find the Gremlin history book off the back of that, and I'm chuffed to say that at some point in the near future we're going to dig into it because I'm really looking forward to covering it. They also did mini golf, etc. It's one of those huge publishing house have done piles and piles of all sorts of games. Anyway, the developer behind it was Magnetic Fields. They did Cosmic Kitten, which is a very odd name, Crystal Dragon, Kid Chaos, Lotus series, that's 1, 2 and 3. I think we covered 2 many episodes ago. Wrangler, I have no idea what that is. That sounds like some sort of cowboy game. And again, loads of other games will be here forever if we keep going through them all. Now, this came out in 1990. It was a grand total of 2 floppy disks, so it was definitely a big one. Now, it was only a single player game, which is probably why I went for the sequel, because that was a multiplayer one, and it was priced at £24.95, which is about normal for titles at the time. The coder behind this was Sean Southern, who also did Cosmic Kitten, Ducks, I think it's called, Kid Chaos, all the Lotus games, something called Pod, Supercars 2 and Super Scramble. That sounds like an arcade game, maybe that's what, I'm not sure. Now the graphics were done by Andrew Morris, who also did Cosmic Kitten, Kid Chaos, all the Lotus games again. There were a huge link of these games across these guys. Supercars 2, I've written scars there, that's my writing. Super Scramble and Wrangler. Also behind the graphics were Jeremy Smith, who worked on Dragonstone. I think that's the CD32 game we did a long time ago. Dungeon Master 2, I have been asked several times to cover that one. I know I did the sequel around about episode 5. My god, 5, that was a long time ago. And he also worked on Supercars 2. The music had a bit of a legend behind it, which was Ben Dalglish, and if I said that, Reno, is it Dalglish? I can't say it properly. And he worked on games like Action Fighter, Corporation, Chubby Gristle, that's another one I'd like to cover. That always reminds me of the Monty Mole games. Something called Federation, Legends of Valor, Munsters, that's with a U in, and I think that's the TV show, isn't it? Anyway, Pac-Mania, both Rick Dangerous games, Skids, or is that Skid 2? Again, I should really learn to read my own writing. And Switchblade, and loads of other games. This guy was over so many different games, he was an absolute legend at the time. Though I don't think we've come across him so far in the shows that I've done, I'm sure we'll come across some of these other games at some point. Straight away though, it does sound like we are in for something special. Now, Sean Southern has stated in interviews that Atari's arcade game Super Sprint actually inspired the first Supercars game, and the game itself was in development for a grand total of 6 months, which is actually incredibly short, with the primary development happening entirely on the Amiga before being converted over to the Atari ST, and I think we ended up with the best version. Now, the main design push for the game was the feel of driving, an odd thing to say, and the best possible way to maneuver around the track. He didn't just want to do, like, say, micro machines and just throwing the car around and making it feel like a toy or an object. He wanted you to be in control of the vehicle and feel like you were working your way across the track. I'm not describing that well at all, that's typical me, but Sean wanted players to feel that they had direct control over the actual vehicles, which made the game an awful lot easier to just pick up and play. It was completely different than other races because they tend to need a fair bit of skill. With this, it's much easier just to grab hold of your stick or or your pad and just sling your way around the tracks. It's not too difficult, it's very easy to pick up. Unlike a lot of the other racing games at the time, crashing the actual car doesn't mean you are going to lose. There's always a chance to catch up with the other drivers, and that's mainly because there isn't many other cars on the actual tracks, and because of that in turn it's sort of self-balancing according to Sean himself, and again that was all done on purpose. I sort of suppose it's a push not to be out of the race once you get knocked back a bit. You always have the opportunity to catch up even if you've been knocked back to last. The races can be fairly long and a good number of tracks, so there's always the opportunity, even if you've been knocked there back because of other attacks or hits or whatever, to catch up to the other people. One of the chaps behind the graphics, Andrew Morris, actually drew the entire game by hand, right down to all of the actual rotation for the car. So that's all the turns and the spins and everything. It's a bit of a mammoth task if you think about how huge these tracks are and what's going on. Again, this is entirely top-down graphical view. It's quite impressive when you see the game. They wanted the game to be more than just your typical racer, hence the sections to customize cars, buy new ones, go through the garage, and not to mention things like all of the upgrades. You can also do stuff like haggling, which was added to make it more interesting, more than just your typical racer. Even if it is all a little bit basic, it's just nice to have all these different options placed around the games. It sort of like spreads it out to be more than it actually is. Now, the game does make extremely good use of the Amiga's scrolling capability, and it uses a lot of the blitter for the actual graphics, and that's mainly because it was just a very easy option for them to use and readily available on the system. Again, that's not something a lot of other systems and consoles and even computers at the time had, so a big plus for the Amiga. Now, the game itself has 9 racing tracks, which were actually created but kept short than your typical ones in other games, and that was just to make the game move much more quickly. Now, they included lots of 90-degree turns, and rather than like big rounded curves, because they only had like a small number of rotations for the actual vehicles. Now remember that poor Andrew was sat there drawing this all by hand, so he was probably sat there, Sean, doing the coding and thinking, oh god, I'd better not tax this poor guy even more and take away weeks of his life by making him draw even more things. Now the cars themselves moved around by using a map placed beneath the actual main track which had been drawn, which all the cars follow simply by being told which direction to actually go and the way that they should be facing. And this was because Sean felt that it made the cars move quite sensibly. They weren't just ramming and banging the way around the tracks, and to be honest, it is quite impressive. They do look quite convincing when they're moving around. Now the game itself was really well received at the time and sold incredibly well, which soon led on to a sequel, Supercars 2. Now that itself was delayed as they moved actual focus over to the Lotus series of games. Now that in itself was a bit of a legend at the time in racing games, so it's no surprise that they moved over to them. But it must have been one hell of a change to move from a simple top-down racing game onto this huge behind the car racing track series. I mean, that in itself became an absolute legend. It was re-released on the CD32. It was one of the most popular Amiga games, or some of them were, I think, through the series. Maybe that was the second one. I'm not sure anyway. It doesn't matter. They were absolutely huge and massive titles. Supercars itself was ported to the Amstrad CPC, the Atari ST and the E, Commodore 64, the NES, which did surprise me because there isn't any more console versions, and also the Spectrum. Though I must admit I am a bit surprised it didn't go any further than that. Mainly because it feels a bit like the perfect 16-bit racing games, and I at least would have expected it over on the Super Nintendo or the Mega Drive. Usually at this point I come on to tell the story, and you might be thinking, oh well, this is a racing game, so there's bound not to be anything included. Yet weirdly there is. It's only a paragraph long, but it goes. Supercars is set in a pseudo-fantasy world with fictitious cars battling for championship supremacy on a spine-chilling and perilous circuit in the middle of a desert viewed from overhead. Each track consists of tortuous turns, straight tunnels and bends which become progressively more perilous as you speed your way through the levels. Other hazards include mud, water and oil on the tracks, which have a variety of effects on speeding cars. As you progress through the game, the amount of opponents you race against and the on-track hazards increase at an alarming and unnerving rate. Now I will say one thing, they're in actual desert tracks and it all starts off, it looks like sunny England to me. It's all green fields and it looks like your typical English countryside. One of the first things you'll see when you first start the game is the opening screen, which presents the actual title of the game on this huge big colourful road sign, and in the background you've got these two very happy people on either side, and then several of the cars from the actual game drive past in this side-on view, and they're really well drawn and it really impressed me, and they move at a fair old pace. There's a quite fair bit of speed there, you know, it really impressed me. Moving on a bit from this, when you actually start the game, you are presented with a car dealership. Several cars are parked out front for sale. There's a garage sign, which is sort of like this little road sign, and that does things like repairs and upgrades. There's also a list of 9 tracks for you to race, which actually can be tackled in any order, but like with all racing games, it's always best to start at one and work your way up, because I think the difficulty level gets more difficult the further on you get through the game. Now, you get to race a grand total of 4 to 8 cars at a time. Of course, that depends on the stages, which tend to have a variety of laps from 5 to 7, depends which actual stage you're on. Now, the game, as I said before, is a top-down racer. It's very similar in style to Micro Machines, though I would say it's more advanced than that, especially in the looks, but it's that sort of feel, it's the same sort of zoom in and style. I couldn't help but be reminded the actual original Grand Theft Auto game, which might sound a bit odd for a racing game, but it just has that look, and it's very similar in the way it drives and the way you throw the vehicles around. And it actually made me wonder, because there is little people within the game and by the side of the tracks and stuff. And again, it's that sort of a GTA look, though they're not moving or running around. But I kept thinking, wow, maybe could the Amiga actually have like a GTA clone? Could maybe someone go back and program something similar using this sort of a style? I mean, again, it's the power of the Amiga. I'm sure anything's possible, though it's probably just me with some wishful thinking. When you jump right into a race, along the bottom of a screen is this gorgeous wooden panel. It's very 80s and 90s. It's like a dash with a speed bar, position, lap counter, engine bar, body bar, fuel and tyres, which all deplete throughout each of the races as you are riding around, and they go down depending on whether you skid too much, brake, etc, etc. Now, the controls themselves are really simplistic, with just fire to accelerate, left and right to steer, up or down to fire missiles. Yes, there's missiles in this, either in front or behind. Steering itself is very tight, and I felt accurate. It feels great to actually control any of the vehicles. It doesn't depend which one you buy, and they all move at a fair old pace around the tracks. And from everything I saw, there is no sort of a slowdown. It's very good. It's very accurate in that regard. Now, the tracks on the game are actually all very compact, but with plenty of straight and really tricky corners. Hitting things like the walls, other cars, that actually damages your vehicle. Again, you've got these bars at the bottom, and that sort of adds this element of risk. It's not a case of you can just sling your way around the track and just bash things out of the way like, say, dodgems or anything. You've really got to be careful as you drive, because too much damage to your car will just kick you out of the race. You need to come in the top 4 positions to get a decent amount of money to be able to buy things or upgrade the vehicle within the actual garage, or even to buy like a completely new vehicle. The garage itself offers a range of items to buy. Now, these only ever last, strangely, for a single race, from things like the power steering, self-explanatory, turbocharger, that's for acceleration, so it's not like you're holding down a button to use it, you just speed up. A high-speed speed kit, it makes you run faster. Retro for braking, which is a bit odd because you don't really have a brake. Spin assist, a lot of the times if you get hit by something or something hits you, you can spin a fair old bit. This thing just keeps you pointing in the right direction. There's also things like side armor. Obviously, if anyone hits you in the side, it protects you and your energy bars. And of course, there is missiles to buy. You have to buy front and back ones, and this is not an infinite supply. If you fire them once in the race, they are gone. So you really got to save them for something really special. The maximum prize that you can win in the races is £20,000, and the upgrades themselves are all different prices. The cheapest is about £1,300 and the dearest is around 5,000 to 6,000. So it's a real balance between the actual races, deciding if you want to upgrade the actual vehicle just for a single race or save up towards a much better car, because a better car is always going to give you a higher chance of coming in first and winning more money. Each of the cars are faster, tougher, they control a lot better, but they can cost tens of thousands of pounds, and again you're only earning £20,000 per race, and unless you of course manage to barter the salesman down with a little bit of haggling, but even then he can get upset with you and knock you back, so you get stuck paying full price. It really does add something there to that element of the game of, you know, going into a car dealership and dealing with a salesman and try to get something knocked off or free. That sort of crazy behaviour. Graphically, the game is really colourful. It's very well drawn when it comes to the sprites. The green English surrounds and obstacles in the roads, they're only very simple things themselves, you know, that's stuff like oil, water, or even sand. It's graphically very well done, and it really is a step up from, say, the likes of Micro Machines. There's been a lot of effort have gone into the actual look of the tracks and the things that are on them. Again, I was quite impressed with it. Of course, all of these obstacles are all squeezed into these rather tight tracks, which of course in turn can be quite deadly if you aren't careful. There's always enough room to make your way around them, but if there's a lot of traffic on the road or you're racing to get through, they really can cause problems. The game has absolutely loads of music, and it's all very pleasing to the ears. Yes, every track does have music pumping away, and again it's all very fast, pumping, real car driving music. They don't sound out of place, and it really does help add to the speed and the pace of the game. Now, the sound effects themselves are actually quite good, with plenty of skids, revving of engines, wallops as you actually hit stuff around the track. I was very impressed with this on the sound front. They really have done a fantastic job with it. Now let's have a look at some gripes for the game. Now first of all, there is no save feature or password system, which is very disappointing. You can spend a couple of hours actually building up for much better cars, you know, gathering your money and stuff, and there's no way to save it or do anything else with it, which is strange. I don't know why they did that. There's also no way to go back and actually redo tracks. Even if you do badly or want to earn more cash, you would need to restart the full game. Now you might be thinking, oh, that's probably not too bad, but again, it's a problem when you're having to save a big pile of money for these big expensive cars. You get a supercar, you've saved up all your money, you're then stuck with it as you're racing, and then you just can't do anything with it. You can't save it, you know, you've got to play with it on the spot. It's just very odd. You might be wondering why I didn't mention the AI of the other vehicles, and that's mainly because there isn't really much. It isn't very difficult to get past them or overtake, and it can be a bit too easy just to lap them or go flying past without much effort. Though there are times when it can feel like fairground dodgems. You have to force your way through a big pile of them because they're always trying to get back onto the way of the roads and keep going in that like simple direction. It sort of works, it keeps them driving around, and as cars on their own, again, it's got that sensible system and it does work. Though for a racing game where you're trying to go up against other people, it doesn't really, and I would have liked them to be more aware of you being there because it would have provided a bit more of a challenge. They just feel like obstacles rather than actual other cars on the track, and that's a very strange thing to consider considering the type of game that this is. Now it's also a real shame that there isn't some sort of challenge mode or a reason to race against, say, a single driver, you know, something like Road Rash, or even in Micro Machines, because they had other players that you got that choice against. Now, they do a great job of creating things like the garage, the salesman, and they could have easily added another section with, say, screen for other challengers. Plus, it could have fleshed out the game a lot more rather than just plain old racing. I love the fact that they've expanded it with these different areas, and I get that they wanted that. That was the main push, to have these different things to not make it feel like a normal racing game, though they really just haven't done enough, and it needs a lot more in there. There's no other fancy racing modes as well. It's not like there's all these great cups to go into or huge things to get after you've won some prizes. It's all about that driving and racing experience, and if you get bored of that or want a bit more, there's just sadly not much of it for you to do. Yeah, it's a very strange one. Moving over to the magazine scores, the One gave it 87%, Amiga Format 86%, Amiga Action sneaking in with 74%, CU Amiga 67%, and finally Amiga Power, which is the highest at 89%. That's a very good mix of scores, if I do say so myself, and it feels like the lower ones are actually a bit unfair. Reviews, of course, are always another person's opinion, and it's only ever just one person, though I suppose you can't always please everyone, and it does explain why there's an odd mix of scores for this one. Now, the thing is, I really had a blast playing this. The range of cars, the upgrades, and the silly yet wild fun racing, you know, it really caught my attention and it drew me into the game almost straight away. I sat there playing this, and about 10 minutes, and I was just like, my god, this is amazing. What a fantastic fun game. And my first thought coming away from the game after that was, why have I not played this before? This is really entertaining. When you look at the game as a whole, especially with the graphics, some of the things like the shadows on the tracks and the other cars, they really made me feel like I was playing a PlayStation 1 game. And I did say before about the comparisons with GTA, it really is on a different level. They really have gone overboard with making this look fantastic for the time, especially with those graphics. That might be a bit of a mixed opinion, because again, it's a simple top-down racer, but when you look at it a lot more closely, I mean, go and look at the gameplay footage that I've done to go with this episode, and you know, blow it up full screen and have a look at the actual detail on the cars and the characters and everything that's going on the tracks. It's quite impressive. Now, sadly, you really don't get any options to tweak things like the music or even do anything different on the actual tracks, though the tracks themselves do tend to get a lot harder as the classes increase, and sadly it just feels like it just needs a little bit more variety thrown in there. It really is crying out for a two-player mode, and of course it's very annoying that there just isn't one and there isn't a choice, especially when you get to use things like rockets and super speed going around. It would have been loads of fun to do a two-player mode, though to add to that, they did realise this after the success of the first game and add it into the sequel, so the option is there later on. The more time I sunk into this, the more I was reminded of dodgems on the old fairground. Getting past the other vehicles at times can be a proper slapdash and wallop as you have to force your way through. Again, it's loads of fun, it's very entertaining when that's going on, though they aren't really too difficult, and once you get round, you're pretty much lapping them on a lot of occasions. It does become a bit easy. This is certainly one worth returning to. It does everything a top-down racer should do. Few more tweaks here and there, it could have been even more better. Again, I've not tackled it yet, though it's just going off my own memory. The sequel is a lot better, and it's something we will have to cover. And now I seem to be talking myself into wanting to cover it next week, but no, I'm going to behave myself, and we're going to stretch this one out for a fair while yet. So yeah, overall, it's got my recommendation. Go out, go play it, have some fun, but I suspect you'll probably have a bit more if you go and try out the sequel. Sadly, that does bring our show to a close. Now, if you've got any comments about anything I've said today, or even if you disagree with me, you can drop me a line, which is lefarius@amigarama.com. Pop along to the Facebook page, which is facebook.com/AmigaRama, or come and see me over on Twitter, which is @AmigaRamaPod. And above all, if you've got a couple of minutes spare, please leave us a review on iTunes. It doesn't take much and it really does help the show. Now, as always, I would like to take a moment to send out a huge thank you to our regular Patreon supporters. They are Adam Bradley, Darren Coles, Figgy CTZ, Graham Vebke, Glenn Milford from Casual Retro Gamer Weekly, Jason Warnes, O'Brien's Retro and Vintage, Retro Ravi, Richard Legg, Sneff and Treble. And if you'd like to join that illustrious list of Patreon supporters, you can do so over on patreon.com/AmigaRama. Until next time, guys.